All right, Katie, I am talking now. Can you hear everything okay? Is it coming through? Can you hear me, Katie Jo? Well, hi. How are you?
Hi, darling.
Good to see you.
How are you, sweetie?
Good. Oh, good. Let's see, Katie's doing a sound check. Okay, awesome. She says she can hear it.
Oh, she could hear us. Huh?
Yeah.
Better get out of the camera.
Uh-oh. Oh,
You been, sweetie?
pretty good. We've been busy.
Have you? Really?
But his wife got it first. And I think she got it. I think we're all fine. It's been a little over a week. But, yeah.
Good. Just got back home to Vegas.
You did? Oh, I did. Good. That's awesome. Florida's is a good.
All was well. It wasn't very crowded.
Nice. Yeah. I guess it's bad for them. The business is there.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't very crowded.
Good for you.
Just because they're getting rid of rooms so cheap. You know, 29, 39, 49. Even at the higher end, like Eulogy. Well, all of your Watts, Oakland, Compton, everybody that stays at the circus, are all staying in the high-end hotels, and they're just trashing. Yeah, but it wasn't too bad because we always had things. On that end of the strip of it, yeah, because rooms are generally not that expensive.
Right.
That much anyway for Luxor, New York, Mandalay Bay, but everybody is staying at the Bellagio and the Paris and the Venetian. So I guess they're gonna jack their prices up because they can't take them.
Yeah, they
Because what's happening is
it's not worth it.
they've only got 25%, 35% capacity in the hotel.
Right.
So the rooms are rather cheap.
Right.
But what's happening is, you and I would go and get a room.
And spend money.
And you and I would go and get a room, two queens, one king, whatever. Right. But then they sneak in 13, there'll be like 13 people staying in the room. And all they're doing is drinking. Right.
If they're just looking for a place to stay for the night. So it's not profitable for them at all.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
Well, shoot. I'm glad you got to make use of it though.
Yeah.
I've never been. Maybe now's the time to go. I almost went for a Star Trek convention, but
Yeah.
oh, that's right. I was so sad it got to.
This trip was supposed to be because she wanted to go see Adam concert.
Oh, I'm sure that's happening.
You can go to see that. You'll find me in the car to see it. I'm not going to see that. But,
How long have you guys been married?
7. To hear her. A long time. It's a long time.
Oh.
So,
Vacation sounds nice.
yeah. You're a wild type.
Yeah, just do a little.
Just go sit at the wall. Just go sit at the slot machine and get a food drink. As long as you're gambling, as long as you're gambling. They're not all that strong.
Right.
But
still.
hey, it's good.
But still.
You slam for it really quick.
Oh. Oh, I guess I better go say hi. Okay, dear. Will you play back that? Okay, yeah. Alrighty.
Alright. So see, buddy, this is how it works. It's a machine that's just going to lower this down into pop-ups in there. It's not in. So everything is in. I don't think that's possible, buddy. Well, that's pop-up will have one.
We're in the work.
What's that? It's really 6 feet. Yep. And then some.
Six feet apart or 6 feet deep.
I'll tell you what, you have to, after Michelle, I'll look around. You know what it is. Look it up and all that, okay?
Oh, wonderful. Okay, there's something. Yeah, and I do. I have it right on the phone in there. Judy, come on in, make yourself comfortable. Do we need more than 4?
I think I'll be fine.
Okay.
Maybe
One more.
for Charlie.
One more for Charlie.
So come on over, guys. Right side. Yeah, I'm not sure if you remember from the past.
Yes.
But you're going to want to put this right over your heart. You got to put it on the left hand side. Or my left hand side. You're right. You're like, I think this much. You can see at the very bottom, started Creek Pie. And the whole tradition, there's a passage we're going to read actually from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. The foolish made the song that everything there's a season. Well, there's a time for tearing, a time for sowing. The whole everything there's a season, a time to be born, and a time to die. It's a reflection on the cycle of life and the stages of life. And yeah, that the tearing goes back to the ancient days. We realize how limited our words are able to capture our feelings. You know that as you were writing things together. And then it's not only with fucking work with Dad, but 18 months ago with Mom, and then with now you're the matriarchs and patriarchs of the family. You know, all of a sudden that comes onto you like, really? And these mixed emotions. So I'm going to find a words of prayer and meditation adequate to me. You know, before language there was gesture, and it is through gesture that we communicate the most profound feelings, whether it's a hug or a kiss or a tear. Now the tear, of course, reflects the fact that this has been torn. Tear up, we tear up. But there also is a time, as it says in the second half of the line, a time for sowing. A time for sowing, when you hear those messages, you hear and you remember the good times and the camping trips. And you didn't get to go to the Arctic. But y'all went to Australia, you had all these experiences together, and it was like, Dad playing guitar or banjo.
Oh God, Dennis.
Leave it to me.
Friendly reminder to silence
Yes,
yourself.
please.
Silence. was hilarious.
Oh, Steve would be, yeah, he would be laughing. Of all the rings.
Those
Okay.
Alright.
hated phones.
So it's remembering all those things and being together and having the laughter. Those are all gestures of sowing, of healing. And we'll do that. It's really starting after this. This is the hardest part. Saying goodbye. And so as you have on either side of that little tear, put your fingers on either side. See the tear?
But you gotta use both.
Yes. So see the very bottom? It's the tear.
Like this. Look. Like this.
Yeah, yeah. You ready?
I'm gonna tear it up.
So we say, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Dayan ha'emet. The little tear. Just an inch. Yeah, perfect.
Did you get it?
And then it says, praise to you, Adonai God, creator of the universe, the judge of truth. Dayan ha'emet. You look at the little salutation I gave you at the end, it always say, Baruch Dayan ha'emet. So what does it mean, truth? I have to thank God for truth in the time of loss. And our ancestors said, oh, okay, what are the parameters of truth? We have life. We come to a mortal end, right? We have a beginning and a terminus. Those are the absolutes. And so Job said, Adonai Natan, Adonai Nakach. God is given, and there's a limit to how long that life is given. Then our ancestors said there's another truth beyond those parameters. And that's the truth of who we are, the truth of our being. And for Steve right now, we honor that truth. And then we say, thank you, God, because for 82 years he blessed this world. And he blessed with your mommy, and he blessed his family and all of his colleagues. That's his truth. We honor that. It's torn right now. We don't tear it in half. We don't destroy it. We leave a moment in that tear for us eventually to sow all that you had together into your days and your stages in it. And it's with that we begin our service. Do you have any questions? So we're going to record this in a little bit. When we're speaking from here, I'm going to take this off so you can read, hear, and be seen. And otherwise, we'll keep this on.
Okay.
Yeah, do we need to adjust any of these
I
chairs?
feel like we need
One
another
more.
one.
Yeah,
Or
just the chairs a little bit.
At least one more.
we'll scoop these three together tight.
Should I bring this other one up front too?
Fine,
No.
just fine.
Okay. You guys feel free to scooch out if you'd like.
Yeah, like, yeah.
These are all connected.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Oh, that's funny.
I can move the whole row forward. Okay.
Steve would have laughed at that too, I suppose. Well, we look out, and I think it's good that we have, I can't say smiling faces because everyone's wearing the masks, and we'll only take it off when we speak up here. But we say, Bruchim habein b'shem Adonai. Each of you have come for a sacred purpose. You're here to pay respect, of course, for Dr. Stephen Goodman, for Steve, and to share your sympathy and condolence to Karen and Michelle, and to Brad and Dennis, to Charlie, to the loved ones, both those here and those who are watching online. Again, it's one of those situations where normally Steve and Pat were members of Temple Sinai since 1971, one of the earliest members. And with all the impact that he had in his long medical career and friends that he made, we'd be in the Zwerin Sanctuary, and it would be packed, and it would be loved ones and friends and your friends, and it would be fitting to feel that embrace of loved ones. But now we have so many that are just watching on Zoom or on YouTube, both here and throughout the country and in Canada and elsewhere. We can't be physically together, but just for this moment, just imagine that we are in that sanctuary and that we're surrounding
this family with love and with sympathy and with condolence. And we're here to say, what a remarkable life Steve Goodman had. What a remarkable man and impact that he had. And so in this service, and you guys put it together beautifully in your website, bless you. Let it be a tribute to, a celebration of a life well led, and also a role model that we'll try to emulate. Our prayers that we're going to recite for the most part are written out on this little handout that I created, and I think those online have a PDF. We begin with a little chanting of Psalm 16. Shiviti Adonai lenagdi tamid, ki mimeni balamot, lachen samach lebi vayagel kavodi. Ach b'sari yishkon levetach, ki lo ta'azov nafshi lishol, lo titen chasitcha lierot shachat, toriyeni l'chayim, sova samachot apanecha, neimot b'meinecha netzach. The psalmist said, I've set the eternal always before me. God is at my side. I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exult and my soul rejoices. My being is secure. For you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful one see destruction. You show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. Now, he's too much of a scientist to everything. Enduring happiness, that we're always going to be happy. No. And that will endure forever? Absolutely not. But it's what we create, the impact that we have, both through our family, our children, our grandchildren, our colleagues, our patients, the students. The enduring happiness is at the end of our journey. We can look back and say, look at the love that I helped to create, and that will continue on. And you gave him that sense of well-being, of accomplishment. And therefore, in each of your next stages and your growth, remember that he's with you. And so if you look on the very first page, we'll read responsibly. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember him. In the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring, we remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember him. The 23rd Psalm is on the very next page, and it's a psalm that has great meaning for those in both the Jewish and the Christian community. An idea that yes, we're mortal. Yes, we walk through that valley of the shadow, but no, we best not walk that valley with fear, but rather with a sense of confidence and a sense of we have things to do. We have a task at hand, responsibilities to fulfill, love to make. In Hebrew, it says, Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot deshe yarbit tzeni amei menachotchan chaleni, nafshi yoshevev, yancheni, b'magalei tzedek lema'an shemo, gam ki elek b'geit zamavet lo irara ki ata imadi, shivtecha mishenchecha mayanachamoni, ta'arot lefanai shulchan neged tzororai, deshanta v'shemen roshi kosiv rovaya, achto v'chesed yedofone kol yomei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai le'orech yamim. We say together in English, a Psalm of David, Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God enables me to lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters. God restores my soul and guides me in paths of righteousness for the sake of the divine. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. When we tore the Kriya, I made mention of this next passage, the 3rd chapter of Kohelet. This begins, "L'kol zman ve'ed l'chol chefetz tachat hashamayim, ed la'leret ve'ed lamut." It speaks of the stages of life, of a human's life, just as there are stages in nature. And it identifies our progression through life with those same understandings that each experience has meaning. So let us read that together. "A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for grieving and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for refraining from embraces, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for letting go, a time for tearing, a time for sowing, a time for silence, and a time for speaking." The stones that they mention of removing is the removal of the stones from the graveside. And the gathering of the stones, you can still see evidence of that, this ancient Jewish tradition of bringing stones back to mark the gravesite. Why? Because in the old days, they didn't have beautiful stelo, the stone markings. Rather, they would pile rocks up. And many of the ancient cultures had mounds of rock that they would pile on top of a gravesite. But what happens when the winter winds and rains come? They wash those rocks away. And so it's incumbent on the family and the loved ones to come and gather those stones back together to mark that spot and to say, this is where this important person is, this person's love that continues on. And it says there's a time for silence and a time for speaking. And I know how difficult it was Friday when he passed. And we said, well, you want to talk right now? He said, well, we need a little time. You have to have time to process before you can speak. And we did have a couple of days to think, and then you keep remembering, I have to remember to say this. We have to make sure that we mention that. And I don't know who was, Charlie, were you the one who helped put together that website? Dennis and Brad, whomever. So that also is a part of the speaking, of the sharing. So let me share a few words, and then Karen and Michelle, you'll share as well. In this week's Torah portion, our ancestor Abraham famously challenged God to redeem even the most despicable of places for the sake of a few righteous souls. Indeed, our Jewish tradition maintains that the entire world hangs in the balance for the sake of the righteous, and an individual soul is of inestimable value. In the case of Dr. Steve Goodman, he was both one of the truly righteous, and he spent his long and distinguished career helping to save lives and preparing other physicians to save lives. On this election day, I had to mention that, when the nation is choosing its political leaders, it is without exaggeration to say that this world has lost one of its greatest medical leaders with the passing of Dr. Stephen I. Goodman. Steve was born and raised in Montreal, the only child of Hyman and Ida. Some of his many cousins and mishpacha are tuning into this service from Canada. Steve was blessed both with a brilliant mind and a sensitive heart. During his childhood, he was greatly moved by the presence of children who had survived the Holocaust, who were now classmates and even friends. The close and dynamic Montreal Jewish community nurtured a sense of faith, pride, and social responsibility. Of course, being Canada, he loved playing hockey. He was also an accomplished musician, playing guitar and banjo to his favorite bluegrass. However, Karen and Michelle are not so sure that he was a big Neil Young or Leonard Cohen or Joni Mitchell fan, let alone the band. But the Canadian folk rock influence is certainly made an impact and part of my core as well. He excelled in math and the sciences, went to McGill University and earned his medical degree there in 1963. His residency took him to Denver and the University of Colorado Hospital. As eventually a distinguished professor of pediatrics, clinical genetics, and metabolism, Steve devoted his career to research, teaching, and tending to those with inherited disorders and genetic abnormalities like autism, and epilepsy, and Down syndrome. His work at the University Hospital and Children's Hospital, and it's so wonderful that we have some of his colleagues here, his work was legendary. Indeed, his 124 articles and books will continue his legacy. A few years after Steve came to Denver, some friends were hosting a curry party. Now, what's a curry party? It's a party where there's spicy foods like curry. And it turned out at the beginning of this party that where he was playing guitar and singing and entertaining, that he found much more than just spicy food. He found a hot romance. He was entertaining the friends, but it was Pat Nash who captured his eyes and attention. He asked around and got her name and phone number and soon called for a date. In no time, they were a couple. They were married by the late Rabbi Joe Goldman on February 28th, 1968. February 28th was an important date. Your dad would make sure that everyone knew this. Why was February 28th important? Because it was a leap year. He would joke that their wedding date was so selected that he only had to remember their anniversary once every 4 years. But he didn't need any reminder of the blessings that he and Pat shared. They were early members of Temple Sinai, and it was with Rabbi Zwerin that Pat embraced Judaism. They have been beloved members ever since 1971. And that was the same year their love was blessed by the birth of Karen. 2 years later, Michelle was born. Both will share their personal remarks in but a few moments. No doubt they will share fabulous stories about their adventures with Steve and Pat in Australia, or the Arctic Circle, or Asia, and other fascinating places. Well, I just happen to have found an old letter from Steve that captures his sense of fun and adventure. I'm sure you have never seen this letter, so I'm going to give you a copy of it afterwards. It's written to Ozzie Sladek. Now, Ozzie Sladek is also a folk singer who had some albums out. He was a Holocaust survivor, then went to Israel. Then he came to America, where he served as our executive director for many, many years. And he and your mom and dad were in the Temple Sinai choir. They sang together, were friends together. And just a remarkable thing, he wrote this letter when the family was in Victoria, Australia, as he was on a long research program. So here's what your daddy said. He said, "Hello from down under. We've been here 3 months now and are all having a wonderful time in a new and strange land. I'm quite busy at work. Pat has plenty to do during the days, and the kids are both attending very good neighborhood schools. Imagine that, no busing. Driving on the left-hand side of the road has been a change, as it is quite an incredible, as is the quite incredible wildlife. Kangaroos, koalas, wombats, duck-billed platypuses, fairy penguins, etc., in abundance. And these animals are not just to be seen in the zoo. They're all over the place. Kangaroos running along beside you on the highways and begging for food in the campgrounds. Koalas munching on eucalyptus trees, leaves in trees alongside the roads. Kookaburras waking you up in the morning. Absolute amazing place. And of course, we all have the comforts of civilization. I'm sure he meant to put quotes there. McDonald's, Wendy's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Monday Night Football on Tuesday night because of the change of the time. Love Boat, right? And he says, all of the latter, not necessarily good, but a reminder of home. And then he has a little paragraph because apparently what Ozzy had done had sent him a letter. He and Pat a letter with some of the attendance figures from Karen and Michelle, I suppose, and report cards from religious school. Right? I know, right? So, listen to what Daddy said. It's fun. He said, one problem you would never know from the enclosed progress reports that they were, and they were talking about you guys, were all talking about the same student. In this case, it was just Karen. It is interesting that only one of her 3 teachers can count. It is, in fact, Karen was absent on only 2 occasions. Miss Newman wins the pool. And in view of this and our present location, she is certainly not about to do the makeup assignment kindly given to her by Mrs. Maisel. Might one suggest that a brief course in mathematics be made a prerequisite for teachers? Anyway, he says, give my best regards to Ray Zwerin and to Selma and the girls and all the rest. And he says, and of course to the girls and the gentlemen of the chorus. That's the Hebrew Temple Sinai Choir, and of course to Mrs. Maisel. So I thought you would want to have a copy of this. Let me conclude with, of course, Steve, a scientist, a physician, a distinguished professor, a musician, a hockey player, a guitar-playing singer, a member of the temple choir, a proud Jew, a loving father, and to Charlie, Pop, which maybe one day he would have gotten used to. As we remember this remarkable man, let us acknowledge the blessings he gave to each one of us. So Karen, would you share yours and then Michelle? I'm gonna give it.
Okay, can you hear me? Yep. Okay, I read this like 3 times out loud and I'm bawled all the way through it, so we're just gonna see how this goes. Maybe taking a few breaks. Okay. I feel like it wasn't that long ago that I stood somewhere similar, although it wasn't the same at all, and talked about my mom and how much I would miss her. It was only a year and a half ago, but the world is different today than it was then. Thank you. Okay. There was no pandemic that was making it confusing and complicated for people to be together, even to mourn the death of someone we all loved. We weren't thinking in the back of our minds about the state of the country and whether or not things would be different soon. Our state wasn't on fire, and frankly, the biggest worry I had that day was how my dad was going to deal with the loss of my mom. Today, I can't even see. Today, all of those things weigh on my mind. And even still, the biggest worry today is how on earth we're going to deal with the loss of my dad. When I was very young, my dad would wake Michelle and I up in one of 2 loving and somewhat unusual ways. He was not known for his patience, as many of us know, so our choices, which weren't really choices at all, were to be woken up by his loud guitar playing and singing downstairs. Come on, it was already 6:30 a.m. on Saturday. How could we possibly still be sleeping? Or we were treated to a dad back massage, which consisted of him rubbing vigorously and pounding on our backs until we leaped out of bed. How ironic it is that the last time both Brad and I each saw our dad before he went into the ICU, he asked us to rub his back. More gently, I promise. Over the last few weeks, Michelle and I have heard all about ways that dad contributed to people's lives and who they are today. I can say the same. I don't eat meat to this day, thanks to my dad's convincing diatribe when I was about 10 about what parts of an animal made up a hot dog. Excuse my language. Lips and assholes were his exact words. From that day forward, I stood my ground and didn't eat another bite of meat. He contributed to my love of math by sitting in the living room in our house in Melbourne, trying to explain to me that actually it was quite easy to find the square root of any number. He repeated the steps over and over and over, and I didn't understand them over and over and over. I know he's known to many as a great teacher, but in that moment, I would have politely disagreed. For a long time, I thought I wanted to follow in his footsteps and become a doctor. I spent a summer working in his lab. I think he taught me how to draw blood, and I think he actually might have made Sherry be my first patient. I went through pre-med courses, not gracefully. I vividly remember calling him crying one night when I found out I got a 38% on my chemistry test. And I talked to him about finally changing my mind and letting him know that I knew I might disappoint him by not going into medicine. I had decided to do something different. I thought he would be upset. Instead, he rolled his eyes and said, "I don't care what you do as long as you do what makes you happy." There's a reason he was still working in the lab, pretty much until he took his last breath. I'm thankful I found a job that makes me as happy. One of the most amazing memories I have is when my dad and I spent a week each summer for 2 summers hiking on the Colorado Trail. We went with the Colorado Trail Foundation and met some amazing people, hiked through some amazing places, learned about flowers and birds, and had some unforgettable conversations. We also slept in a tiny 2-person backpacking tent together for 2 awfully smelly weeks. One of my favorite memories of those trips was on a day when he took off of hiking and went with some of the leads to set up camp early. We were in a place where there were multiple sites all close by, and since he didn't want close neighbors, he found some cardboard and made a simple sign that would keep people away. I remember walking in after a long day of hiking and saw him sitting underneath it. Boy Scout Jamboree, it said. It was a surefire way to keep everyone far, far away, and it worked. There was nobody around for miles. My dad was strong and independent, and I never saw him any other way until my mom's 80th and Michelle's 40th birthday when we took a family trip to Yellowstone. His trips to Yellowstone had usually included getting up close and personal with bison and moose and sometimes even wolves. This trip, unfortunately, saw almost everyone in the family getting up close and personal with the toilet. We all had a 24-hour bout of a stomach flu, and Mom and Dad had the worst cases. It was one of the only times Dad let me help him, and wow, I'll leave out the details, but there was a lot to help with. In usual Dad fashion, once things settled down, he was out the door with his camera on his back, ready to drive into the park at 6 a.m. Nothing stopped him for long. Some of my most recent favorite memories of him were riding a bike for the first time in about 20 years and the 2 of us touring around my neighborhood on e-bikes. He was even considering getting a bike himself. Too bad COVID made that almost impossible. I also loved the day that Dad got sick enough of being stuck inside alone that he figured out Zoom. It was a Sunday morning, and after several "can you hear me now" comments, his camera flashed on, and there he was, his hair in wild, wind-blown COVID fashion, wearing his bathrobe, with the most giant smile on his face. He was obviously happy to see us. I had a conversation with him just before he went into the hospital for surgery, in which, for some reason, I felt the need to tell him thank you and that I loved him. He was, as you all know, not the sappy emotional type. I'm so glad I did it. The last few weeks were hard on all of us. He was scared and sad, and in some way he knew he was dying. I am thankful that it was relatively quick for him. He never would have liked getting old, and he never really did. Take it away. I've got nothing compared to that. In very typical Michelle fashion, I left this for the last minute because I thought it'd be easy, because I love talking about Dad and telling people about him. It wasn't easy. I tried to put Dad's humility
and gentleness and wisdom and independence and patience and excellence into some kind of sensible eulogy, and I can't. As kids, we had no idea what Dad did. We visited his labs on Saturdays, sometimes Sundays. That was Mom's day off to recover from working nights. And he would check stuff and read stuff and shake stuff. We would sit there and draw pictures of footballs for Harry and McKelvey. And we remained absolutely clueless. He had kids' lives in his hands, and we had no idea. He was humble, and he never brought work home. He never grieved or celebrated work at home. He was just Dad. He sang to us about the moon being made of cottage cheese. He read to us. He drove us to school. He took us to Shakey's after Hebrew school. And he was just Dad, albeit very stressed and easily triggered Dad. In the past few weeks, even though Dad was heavily sedated through most of it, I have learned more about him than I had in the previous 47 years. I knew him as a person, but I never knew all of what he did. And thanks to you guys, to Michael, and to all of his friends that I was keeping in touch with online, and messages I got from people I've never heard of before, I've learned a lot. And I'm not shocked by how many people have learned from him or how large a hole he has left. But I just keep getting stuck on how we never knew so much of it. And he never shared it with us. Maybe he genuinely just wanted to be our dad. Maybe he needed to leave work at work. And maybe we'll never know. But I also think that he never saw himself the way other people saw him. He was a pillar within his field, but he thought he was just a guy doing his best with his big brain and his giant heart and a lot of luck, and that was the way he saw it. He always said he just got lucky. We were talking to Michael the other day in the lab. He was always in the lab. In Dad's room. And he was kind of explaining to me how he was one of the first to do what he did. And I said, so what you're telling me is Dad was like the David Bowie of genetics? And his response was, well, yeah, but not as weird. So as much as Dad would hate it, I'm going to leave you with Bowie quote, which I do think he would have agreed with, and was maybe part of why he was so humble. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. You nailed it, Dad. You were loved by everyone you met. Thank you.
Maybe. Well, I, for some reason, have decided to speak after those extraordinary talks. I don't know what is possessing me right now. You guys were just those are the most awesome Steve capturing talks. I can't even, my speech is like minuscule by comparison. But it does bring a little bit different view. And I was encouraged by my co-workers. Steve Goodman is really a one-of-a-kind guy. He's an extraordinary person. He was a great mentor and a fabulous dad. He hired 2 very young med techs, Lisa and I, newbies out of med tech school, and took a chance on us, and he gave us a job. Little did we know that this began a 37 and 38-year-long journey that we have been on. But it was so much more than just a job. To say it was all rosy would be a lie. He is a character. He definitely had his moments of lack of patience. But he always made sure that we were all good by the end. And it was truly a wonderful journey that I would never, ever have given up for anything. He was not only a dad to Karen and Michelle, but he was a dad to Lisa and me. When we needed one the most. And Lisa and I needed a dad lots of times. He was a great teacher. He was a great mentor. He was a funny storyteller. Every one of us has a memory of one of his funny stories, and he shared with us all. And several of them I've heard many times, and I still laughed every single time because he just had a way of telling a story. He was a gifted musician. Many times he shared his love of music with us. He loved his trips to all parts of the world and taking photos of wildlife that were truly extraordinary pictures. And he donated 3 of them to the lab. And I think the lab is a better place because those pictures are there. They're great pictures and remind us all of him. He never stopped learning. He was constantly learning new metabolic diseases. Never stopped looking at organic acid spectra, ever. On the day before he went into the hospital, he was still reading out organic acid spectra, figuring out what that compound was, what its structure was, how did it get in that metabolic pathway. And he knew those metabolic pathways forwards and backwards. I'd have to open books and he would go, no. And he would draw the structure and draw the pathway. And I'm like, how do you remember that? How do you remember that? He had a photographic memory. It was amazing. Even at 82, he still had a memory like a tack. I'm telling you, sharp. He was truly an amazing person. So every person who ever worked with him had a fellowship, a rotation, or whatever in the lab. We're so fortunate to know such a great man. To work with him for so many years, to learn so much, to learn from the very best. We are better people for that experience. As we move forward, others will sit in Steve's seat but no one will ever wear Steve's shoes. He was an extraordinary human being.
In about a moment, we'll be lowering the casket. But before we do, I wanted us to share this beautiful little meditation that you can find on page 3 of the handout. It says, birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage, made stage by stage, from birth to death, to life everlasting. If you are able, please rise as we lower the casket. Adonai natan Adonai lekach, yehi shem Adonai mevarach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yatza etchem mitzamo, v'zan v'chakeh etchem b'tuvo, v'emit etchem badin, v'nata b'tochechem chayei olam. Baruch atah Adonai dayan haemet. Atah gibor elam Adonai rab lo Hoshia, mechakeh chaim b'chesed, v'chayei mitim b'rachamim rabim, somech noflim v'rofeh cholim matir asorim. Kayem emunato l'shnei afar, michamocha balgevelu midom elach, melech memit umchai metmir kashua, baruch atah Adonai noteh b'tochenu chayei olam. God gives, God has taken away. Blessed is the name of God. We praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who forms us in the divine image. You nourish and sustain us in goodness. You have made us mortal, and yet you have implanted immortal life within us. We praise you, O God, judge of truth. Eternal is your might, O God, and all life is your gift. Great is your power to save with love. You sustain the living, and with great compassion you give life to all. You send help to the falling and healing to the sick. You bring freedom to the captive and keep faith with those who sleep in the dust. We praise you, O God, who implants eternal life within us. Feldman's has provided for the family this earth from Israel, and specifically within Israel from Jerusalem, and specifically within Jerusalem, Mount Olives, which is considered the most significant of all the places for a Jew to be buried. Not everyone can be buried there, obviously, but it's possible, and Feldman's was kind enough and generous enough to be able to provide some of that earth from Mount Olives in Jerusalem here, so that as we take some of this earth and from Denver and place it on the gravesite, we'll also have, I'll put some in your hands, some from Jerusalem also, and I dare say the next time you're up from Montreal, bring some of that home. Don't tell anyone at the border. And you can sprinkle that on there too. Because of the way this gravesite is set, we can't have full kvora. We can't totally cover the gravesite, but it with the aron, with the casket itself, it fulfills the mitzvah, and they will have a cover that goes on top of that as well. So he will be, his remains will be protected physically, just as you protect his remains emotionally and spiritually.
A little bit. I do.
No. Oh, that's your mother.
As we have fulfilled that mitzvah of covering the gravesite, if you look on page 4, we have the memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim, and we make mention to Stephen's Hebrew name, Shimon ben Chaim ve'Ida. So if you're able to remain standing, as we recite this prayer that makes mention of his neshama, his soul, and it says, Yitzor b'tzor chaimet nishmato. May it be that his soul is bound up in the bond of everlasting life, bound up with chayim, with all of the universe. And as a scientist, he would say, oh yes, the conservation of mass and energy, right? Everything still that existed has always existed in one form or another. But it means more than that. It also means that his life will be bound up the chayim, with life, and chayim, the living, with you. If you look at the bottom of many of the grave sites, you'll see the Hebrew acronym, the Tav and the Beit, the Tzadi, the Beit, and the Hey, for that Tihye Neshama May it be that his neshama, Soro B'Tzor HaChayim, will be bound up in the bond of the living, of life. And that's what this prayer is all about, to remind us that his life, his soul, continues on. El Malei Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamzeh Menucha Nechona Al Kanvei Hashchina V'malot Kedoshim Tohorim Kazahar Ki Hamazirim Et Nishmat Shimon Ben Chaim Vaida Shalach Le'olamo Began Eden תהיה מנוחתו, לכן ברחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. V'nomar Amen. Let us say together in English, O God, exalted and full of compassion, we pray that you will grant perfect peace and eternal comfort in the sheltering presence to the soul of Dr. Stephen Goodman. God of mercy, protect his neshama. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Adonai, you are his portion. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. On page 5, the Kaddish Yatom. At 4 o'clock, if you look on the website that they put out together for Steve, there is a link. It's a Zoom link, I believe. So it's at 4 o'clock, and I'll put up just a few meditations, some of which that you have right here. And then we'll have a chance to share stories. And I don't know if you have a video, I don't know if you have pictures or whatever you want to do. But one of the reasons that we'll be together is also then to be able to allow the family to recite Kaddish another time. So we say the Kaddish, which again is a prayer that is the affirmation of the goodness of life. And what else would he have wanted? But for each of you to say, you know what, I'm going to, in his honor, in his memory, live life, even to the highest of my standards, and make him proud. So we say, Yitzgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah be'alma devarach chirotei v'yamlich malchotei v'chayechon v'yameachon v'chayei decho be'Yisrael ba'agala b'zman kari v'imru amen. Yeh shemei rabbah mevarach le'olam ul almei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shemei dekudishah baruch Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata de'amiram be'alma v'imru amen. Yeh shalom rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mroma u'ya'asei shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Page 6, this last page is beautiful meditation, I think, that reminds us of what we need to focus on. Page 6. We say together, for the ties of love that death cannot sever, for the companionship we shared along life's path, for those gifts of heart and mind which have now become a precious heritage. For all this and more, we are grateful. Now help us, O compassionate God, not to dwell on sorrow and pain. Help us instead to find within our hearts the courage to return to the tasks of life and its joys. Amen. So on behalf of the community, we say, Michelle and Karen and Brad and Dennis and Charlie, the whole family, and all of the loved ones and colleagues, Hamakom yenechem etchem, v'tok sha'al avalei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God, who is Makom, God is in every place. Makom means place. And everywhere we are, there's a sense of the presence of the Creator. May God comfort you along with all who mourn in Zion and Jerusalem. Go forth with life. Go forth with peace. Amen. Again, the Zoom Shiva and gathering will be at 4 o'clock.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our service.
Thank you.